Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's OEBcast. Delighted to be with you. I'm Donald Taylor. I'm the chair of the Learning Technologies Conference in London, and of course, I've opened the OEB conference in Berlin for the past 5 years. Great to be with you today. Looking forward to sharing some thoughts about the Global Sentiment Survey, the Learning and Development Global Sentiment Survey, which I do every year, and which looks at what's happening in the world of learning and development. How do people feel about what's happening? What are they excited about? What are their challenges? You might say, Don, I know what the answer is. It's AI. Yes, AI is important, but we're not going to be talking a lot about that today. There are a few other things we're going to be talking about, and I look forward to your participation and your sharing as we go through this together. So, firstly, let me begin by sharing some thoughts about the Global Sentiment Survey, giving you some background, and then we'll get on with the agenda. So, firstly, a big thank you to the sponsors. You can see the sponsors at the top there, and the key media partners. And the media partners are crucial for getting a fabulous number of people from across the world, from 100 countries across the world, to participate in the Global Sentiment Survey. I want to look at 4 things today and then wrap up with a 1-slide conclusion. Don't worry, there's going to be a lot of talking there. That's just me saying here are some important things we've looked at today. I want to look at the results for the survey this year. And I want to look at what I think is the most important part of the results, which is value, not AI. I'll explain more when we get to that point. Then I want to step back and look at the world as a whole. Then we're going to look at the challenges that people have. And finally, as I say, wrap up with that 1 slide of conclusions. So firstly, let's have a look at the results for the survey. And you can see from this that, yeah, there are, the clue is in the image that there is one thing which dominates the results this year, no question about it, and it is, of course, AI. Let's have a look. Background to the survey. There are 5 questions in the survey, but there's only ever been one obligatory question, which is this one. What will be hot in workplace learning and development in the coming year? So we asked this question, and we asked people to choose up to 3 options from a list of 16 options. The survey has been going for 12 years. Always, well, in the past several years, between 3,000 and 3,500 people have responded to it. And there's usually about 100 countries respond, more or less. The one obligatory question is this one. There are 4 other questions. One is, if you want the report, please share your email address. One is, which country are you voting from? And the other 2 questions I'll share with you now. One is, where do you work? And we give people a choice of 5 places that they could say they're working at, from workplace learning and development and a bunch of other places. And you can see here that about half the survey respondents come from workplace learning and development, the teams of people who are doing the job of training people up in the workplace. That number, 48%, is remarkably consistent. Every year it's about that number of people. And the other question which we ask people is, what's your key learning and development challenge this year? And the detail here is that 85% of people responded to this. This is an optional question. It's a free text question. You have to do some work. You have to write. 85% of people responded to it, writing a total of 29,000 words in a free text box. That's quite a lot of words, and I'll talk about that later on when we come to the challenges section. There are some interesting things coming out of the challenges piece, and I really want to see what you make of that as well during the course of the webinar. Let's press on. I want to say just one caveat here, and it's always the same caveat, which is it's not a representative survey. If I was a political pollster finding out how people are going to vote, I'd want to get people from every age group. I'd want to get people from every geography. I'd want to make sure that every religion, background was covered. We just invite people to respond to the survey. So it's self-selecting. People choose to vote. That means that the people who vote on the Everett Rogers diffusion of innovation curve are almost certainly the people over on the left-hand side. They're the people who are excited about what's happening with learning and development, excited about new things in particular. And these innovators and early adopters are the people who are going to have ideas they want to share. So they respond to the survey. Now, you might say, Donald, why are we bothered about these people? And the answer is, it's not the case that all of the things that people say are hot go on to become widely adopted. We know that because we've seen a history in learning technologies of things not being adopted. But it is the case that everything which is more widely adopted was once thought of as being hot and exciting by the innovators and the early adopters. So the question is, who's going to win? Which things are going to move from the world of the aficionado to more wide adoption? And also, within that, we have to ask ourselves, which things are real and which things are hype? And that's particularly true, of course, of AI, where there is a great deal of reality that it is changing lives. There's also a great deal of hype. So we have to try to sort out the reality from everything else that's going on and try to pick the winners. And that's why I'm always excited to do this each year. So as I said, very much looking forward to sharing the results with you. Something strange happened this year with the survey, or so I chose to do something strange this year. Normally, when I give the list of options that people can choose from, so the 16 options, I each year take one thing off and I put one thing on. Usually the thing I take off is at the bottom of the results table from the previous year because people aren't interested in it. But this year I kept the list of possible choices the same. And the reason is this. There was such a strong response to AI last year. In last year's survey, we had 21.5% of the votes going to AI. Just to be clear, previously, the highest, most popular option we'd had got 13% of the vote. So rather than 13%, it was 21.5% of the vote. That's a huge jump. And I wanted to say, okay, this year, the only thing we're going to change is time. Everything else will stay the same. I want to see, given exactly the same circumstances, 12 months on, how do people feel about it? My guess was that AI would be less popular this year than last year, because after all, last year, that was a huge jump from whatever to 21.5%. And I said, never in the history of the survey have we seen anything do that. It can't happen again. It must go down. I was wrong. Here's the overall results for the survey for this year. I want to just quickly go over that for you and point out what's happening here. So we've got the option here. The number in brackets afterwards is the place it was on the table last year. This is the share of the votes. Now, just to be clear, when I say the share of the votes, remember each person has 1, 2, or 3 votes. 95% of people actually choose to use 3 votes. So there are 3 votes from each person coming in. So therefore, 22.6% of all of those votes were for artificial intelligence. That means that about 3 times that number of people voted for it. So about 66% of people, 2/3 of people, voted for AI. That's how dominant it is. And on the right-hand side, we've got the arrows. A green arrow going up is a rise. A red arrow going down is a drop. If it's in a circle, that means it's a big rise or drop by more than 1%. Okay. Initially looking at that, you might say, Don, the story's about AI and that's it. I think there are 3 big things we can take away from this key table of results this year. And yeah, the first one is definitely AI dominates things. Now, it was my mistake to guess that it would go down this year. I should have learned that when things are unprecedented, when things have never happened that way before, then the history is no guide to the future. So don't look back and say, that was a big jump. It must go down now. Clearly, it can go up. I'll ask in a minute whether you think that's going to keep going. We'll see. Okay, so that's the first thing. AI dominates the results. The second thing is that if we look at the top 5, you can see they're in the same positions as last year. That's never happened in the 12 years of the survey. And you can see that all of these options, the top 5, are concerned with data and or skills. You need data to do all of these things, and in particular, and of course, if it's a skills piece, then the skills usually feed off some form of data. So data and skills hold on to their positions, but notice here we've got a big drop and a big increase. There's something else happening just outside the top of the table, and here we can see that value, 3 options around value are back. There are only 4 big green arrows on this table. One is for AI, and here these are the other 3. And these 3 options I call the value trio. We're going to look at them in the next section very shortly. The key thing about the value trio is that they behave differently, and I'll explain this in a minute. They behave differently and predictably differently from other options on the survey. It's noticeable. I think they are associated together in people's minds. So people think, well, I first need to consult with the business to see what problems and issues there are. Then I need to do something like support performance. And then finally, I will show the value that I've delivered. Now, these 3 things leapt up this year. Nothing else did, apart from AI. I'm going to ask you about that in a bit. First, let's have a look at what's been happening with AI. As I said, I got it wrong. I thought AI was going to fall away this year. I want to ask you a question, so get ready to type some stuff into the chat in a second. I want to share with you a view of where AI has been over the past several years. So we're going to look at the vote for AI over these 5 years, and we're looking at 4 geographies. Brazil and Ireland, these are traditionally technically skeptical. They tend to focus more on people than on technology, and they tend to wait for a new technology to come out before backing it. USA is a technology leader, and the world is everybody else. So here, for the first 3 years, we can see that AI was really very low down in the voting. And then in 2023, the USA, that light blue line, took off with the voting. It led enthusiasm for AI. That's very normal for the USA to do that. The world followed along. Brazil and Ireland were holding back. They weren't so interested. Last year, everyone got on the AI bandwagon. USA led the way, the world came along, Brazil and Ireland caught up quite speedily. This year, against my predictions, things kept going upwards. They kept going upwards apart from the USA. And what happened with the USA? USA dropped its vote by almost 4%, 3.9% decrease, which in terms of the survey is a very large number. What happened here? I would love to know in the chat. Please put your thoughts in when you're ready. I'm going to keep speaking, then I'm going to have a glass of water. I would love your thoughts because we've seen this in the past in 2016, 17, and 18 with micro-learning. With micro-learning in 2016, the USA voted for it very heavily. The world wasn't interested. In 2017, the world suddenly caught up to what the USA was saying and voted a lot for it. But the USA vote dropped away, very much like we see here between 2024 and 25. And then the next year, 2018, everybody reduced their vote for micro-learning. So my question to you is, what does this mean? Does this drop in the USA vote? And also there was a drop in the UK vote as well, by the way. But does this drop in the USA vote, which leads the world, does that mean that we've turned the corner in hype around AI? Are we going to see a drop in the votes for AI next year? I would love to get your votes on it. And we've got some thoughts on it. We've got some thoughts coming in here. They realize the limitations of AI is one possible way of looking at it. What else? Please drop your thoughts into the chat. That's Monica. What else would you say? And by the way, if you think that AI is limited, I'd be really interested to know about it. But I think, Monica, you have a point there that there is a a sense that AI is not the magical thing it was, even though it's very useful. And we've got a thumbs up for Monica there. Any other thoughts, please drop them to the chat. I'm going to finish off my 3-shot latte. Regulation. Gil, very interesting. Gail saying, wouldn't it be linked to adoption? The idea being, I guess, that if things being adopted, that therefore it becomes less hot. That's normally the case, Gail. Yes, it may be that what we're seeing in the USA is already the idea that it's moved from being something that's super new to something that's getting closer to business as usual. And Rasmus is saying, I kind of feel, I guess, that it was a hype and now we're returning to normal. Policy, Kirsty says, pulling back on usage and making people use it more carefully. That's really interesting. And Gail says, and I think everybody's answers are good here. And I think Gail's and also Rasmus is the right sort of idea here. It drops when professionals feel comfortable using it, and that's absolutely the case. We've seen that in the past with mobile. For example, mobile delivery started at top the table in 2014. I took it off 2 years ago because it went from being super hot to being business as usual. So my question then is, well, I mean, we keep thinking about this and keep chatting about it, please. Is it just in the USA this is going to happen, or is that sentiment going to spread across the rest of the world, that we all get more used to it, that more regulation comes in, there are organizational policies perhaps restricting what we can do? And Anne-Marie says kind of the opposite thing. Anne-Marie. It might be less attractive because organizations are still not ready to fully use it. So they're not quite ready to get on board with it, and so they're feeling a bit more reluctant now. Other players started with their LLMs, and America no longer has a monopoly. Anthony, I hadn't thought about that at all. It's a possibility. I have heard other pushbacks as well as to why the USA in particular should be feeling more negatively about this. And Richard points out one of them, concerns over job loss. Great. Look, please do keep your thoughts coming. Keep discussing between yourselves online. You know, I always say that one of the great things about the internet is the fact that I can sit at my desk in London and I can have I can listen to intelligent people and get intelligent thoughts from people from around the world. It's an absolute privilege. So please do keep those thoughts coming. And of course, you may respond to other people in the chat and agree or disagree with them. They realize the adoption of AI asks a lot. Now, Anushka, I think there's a lot in that, and I'll point to a report in a minute that I put out last year, which indeed suggests that's the truth. Whether people realize it is another matter. So please do keep the chat coming. Here are the 3 reports which I wrote last year in conjunction with my extremely able co-author, Egla Vinauskaite. So Egla and I put together 3 reports because there was so much talk about what was happening with AI, but there wasn't actually much reality as far as we could make out. And nobody was saying what's actually happening. This one was on the anniversary of the launch of ChatGPT. Then we did another one in April. And then finally, at some point later on in the year, we did, about in October, in fact, we did a report which looked at, well, what are people actually doing? And these 2 here, from talk to action and intention and reality, we looked at what people are actually doing. And we've got a total of 13 case studies across those 2 to show what's really happening. That's always the philosophy of the research that I do. I try not to be prescriptive, telling people what to do, but descriptive, saying, hey, this is what is happening, and these are the common themes that we can see across them. And indeed, the idea that, and as Anushka said, that there is potentially a problem around using AI in L&D, that it's more complicated than we think. We started on that, and Egla in this paper came out with the idea that things are complex and you can go from a simple to a sophisticated adoption. She calls that the complexity scale. And then this one, we launched the idea of the immaturity model to share the thought that there is no automatic maturity that takes you from here to there in terms of using AI. There's a series of complex things that are required. I'm just going to drop the links to those reports into the chat. So by all means, when you have time, go and have a look at those. I'm not sure if those links work or not. But in this last report, Intention and Reality, as always, we do a survey to go along with the anecdotal, the qualitative stuff. And we did a survey of 420 people looking at what they were thinking about with L&D and AI. And we asked them, these 400 people, so the survey is September, the report came out in October. We asked them, what benefits do you expect? Gave them a list of 12 things. They could choose any number of things. The average was about 3 that they chose. What are the expected benefits that you think you'll get from AI? We gave them this list of 12 things. And this should be like you're a kid in a sweet shop. You can have anything you want. You can have that stuff on the top shelf that's really bad for your health. You can have the fizzy drinks. You can have the ice cream, anything you want. It's expected benefits. We're not asking people what they're actually doing. And the biggest expected benefit from 420 people who were self-selecting, who are excited about AI, excited about new ideas, was to create learning content faster. This worries me a lot because there is so much that you can do with AI, so much that's being talked about in terms of what you can do with AI, real case studies that we've written about what people are doing with AI, particularly around skills. But if we look down at the bottom here, we can see identify skills, provide extra skills practice, both of which are actually happening right now and not seen as being the big benefits of the use of AI. Big benefit is that you can do it faster. Not to improve the quality of the design, it's just you do it faster. And I always say to people, okay, so let's say you're spending 10 hours a week designing and possibly maintaining content. AI might help you reduce that from 10 hours work to 1 hour's work. All right. What do you do with the extra 9 hours? And at this moment, very often people's face sort of registers shock because they'd assumed that, of course, what they were going to do with that time was create more content faster. But if you do that, then you've gone from producing X to 10X amount of content. That doesn't help anybody. It's got to be you're using that extra 9 hours or whatever the number is to do a better job of what you do. And I would suggest that one of the things to do is to spend more time working with the business to understand the nuances of the challenges people face rather than to create more content. And I love Joseph's point here, or Joseph, thank you. I'm sorry if I've incorrectly pronounced your name. AI should result in less content being produced. It brings information search so much closer to the learner. I totally go along with that sentiment, Joseph. I do hope that that's what we understand in L&D. I absolutely believe it's the case, and it's what's going to happen. The risk is that AI leads to learning and development people being disintermediated, to use a phrase that was very big in the 2000s at the dot-com boom. The idea being that you don't have to go through the middle point anymore. You can find stuff directly. Real issue, Joseph. I love you, the fact you raised that. Thank you. Okay, so I talked about value being the big thing I wanted to talk about this year. And let's have a look at that table again. So on the table, we have the 3 options of the value trio: consulting with the business, showing value, and performance support. Now, this has an arrow next to it, and it shows you that there are a rise that's significant. Okay, now look, Rasmus has got a good point in the chat. Look, Don, doing something in 1 hour instead of 10 is an extreme example. But using AI to create content in 9 hours instead of 10 is realistic. And if so, great. Yes, I agree, Rasmus. My real concern about this actually is that people in L&D and outside L&D are going to be creating content very quickly that is not very good. It's what I call the beige wave. And if you go onto LinkedIn, I haven't got a link to it, but if you search for beige wave, then you'll see a post I put up about this, which is my concern is that people are going to create content with insufficient quality control. I am all for using AI to create stuff and to do it really well. My concern is that people in L&D won't do that because their focus is on doing it faster. Now, okay, yes, you might say, Don, your example is inaccurate, and maybe it is. But for me, the focus should absolutely be on quality rather than on speed, because other people in the organization are going to be using AI all the time. And take this report as an example. I have people come up to me all the time and say, Don, I read your report. Well, I didn't actually read it. I put it into Notebook LM and I listened to the podcast. But I've listened to the podcasts that are produced by automatic tools like that, and they miss the nuance. And very often, actually, they get things wrong. Some things they get right. So if you're telling a story, like a case study, then something like an LLM can do a really good job of summarizing it. But I've found that if you're presenting a model, it actually, and it's an unusual model, but it has a real tough job making sense of it. So my concern is that people throughout the organization won't be going to L&D. As Joseph was saying earlier, it puts people closer to the source material. They'll go to the source material, they will then summarize it, and they won't necessarily do a good job with it, and they'll be left with an inaccurate view of what stuff is going on. So there is nuance here that we need to discuss. So please keep the conversation going. I'm very keen to discuss it. By all means, if you're disagreeing with what I'm saying, and you've got good examples in particular of alternatives, please throw them in the chat, because we need to keep always a vigorous, open, collegiate discussion going. Thank you. But let's come back to value. So look, we've got here these three things moving up the table. And remember, they're the only three things, along with AI, that moved up the table this year. Everything else went down. It doesn't tell you how much they moved. So let's have a look at a different graphic that shows the extent of the movement. Here, the ones at the top, I'll reveal something in a minute that shows how much they're going upwards. But at the bottom, you can see here, these are losing votes. And it's the sort of shape you'd expect, half a Christmas tree, like things are reducing gradually because these ones we've voted a bit less for, these ones we really are less concerned about this year. You'd expect on the top that the same sort of shape would be there. So it'd be like an inverted triangle like this one. But that's not what happens this year. What happens this year is that there's a little jump forward for this one, and everything else is just over 1%. It's like people are saying, I need this stuff. Give it to me. It's not this. There's no graduated emotion here. There's no sense of I'm a bit less interested in this and a lot more interested, a lot less interested in this. This is the stuff that's important. It's a wholehearted commitment to it, and I've never seen that before on the survey. It's more weird stuff that AI is throwing up, I think, and I say AI is throwing it up because even though these three things here, the value trio, are nothing to do with AI, I do think their jump this year is the result of AI. Let's go back and have a look at the history of these things, and I'll aim to show you what I mean. Value trio, we've seen these three options are, I said earlier, predictably different from other options on the table. What tends to happen is that things trend downwards over time. So here's collaborative and social learning, which you see has gone down over time. There was a hiccup in the middle here during the pandemic. The hypothesis is that during lockdown, people felt the need to be more social. But overall, things trend downwards. So things start as something that's exciting and end as something that's either business as usual or a bit complicated and we're not interested so much now, we'll think about something else. So the question is, does the value trio do the same thing? Well, initially, it looked like it was going to. So for the first 4 years, these things were kind of on a downward trend. And then for 5 years, they stayed level. In fact, there's a very slight upward trend there for these three together. And this is the global results we're looking at. And then in 2024, bang, they took a hit downwards. Like everything took a hit downwards. And then this year they bounced back. And as we've seen, they're the only things to have bounced back this year. So all of those options that we just saw, which were in the bottom part of that graphic where they were losing votes, they lost votes last year and they lost votes this year. But not these three. These three jumped up. And I call this an era of predictability followed by the AI shock. And here it's almost like all eyes were on AI and we weren't voting for anything else. And then here we have a AI recovery. And so my question to you is, why have only these three options recovered so strongly this year? And actually, interestingly, Gail has kind of begun to answer this question already with her question, are you telling us that AI is the enabler of the value trio? Well, that's one possible explanation. It may be that there's so much excitement around AI that people are saying, that's great, I can now show value and do these other things as well. That's one explanation. But I think there are at least three possible reasons for this shape, this drop, and this recovery. So I'm going to leave that with you for the moment while I have a sip of water. I'd like your views on why you think these options have recovered so strongly this year. If I'm speaking too fast, I'm sorry. I had 3 shots in my coffee this morning. I'll share with you what I think my hypotheses are. One is what Gail said in the chat, which is, maybe AI is making it possible for us to show value. Another option is economic circumstances and the budgets within the organization are really tight this year. And I need now to do these things much more urgently than I did in the past. Now, that works in some places. In the UK, for example, the economy is not strong. Elsewhere in the world, the economy is quite good. So it doesn't quite make sense it should be globally. And I can see now, I just want to reference some of the great thoughts that are coming in. And so Stella says, is it partly because people are reevaluating their role and they realize that if they don't add value, the role will be gone? Anthony says the same thing. People are afraid of being replaced by AI, possibly. And yeah, I'm sorry. There's a lot of stuff coming through here, and I appreciate. I do throw a lot of data out at you here, so apologies for that. The slides will come to you, and the report will come to you from OEB. So please don't worry about trying to take notes about everything. And Joseph's saying, coming back to social learning, that there's the social learning is going down is not a good sign. I'm going to come back to that at the end, Joseph, because I'm not sure how bad a sign that is, what it means. So I'm going to just make a note to return to that later on. Monica says it might be a reality check. It was realized what counts for the organization in worldwide competition. So I think all the answers here are reflecting the reality, the possible reality, the possible hypotheses. One is, hey, we can do more with AI. Another one, as Monica says, is, well, we just need to be more competitive. Another one is that there are economic circumstances which are tight, and so I need to look after my job. But that doesn't work across the world. In the USA, it doesn't apply in the same way it does in the UK, for example. But this is true. These are the results for the world. And the other hypothesis, which is the one that I buy, I think is the one that Stella and Anthony were looking at here, which is, I think people are afraid of losing their jobs. They're looking at what AI can do and saying to themselves, I may be about to be replaced. I better show value now. I don't believe that if you do your job well in A&D that the role will go. I do believe that the tasks people are going to do will definitely change. So perhaps we can have a conversation about that when we get to the end. This business of the shock and the recovery, I found, is something that applies not just to these three. It applies to these three and only these three for the global results. But interestingly, I found it also applies to particular countries with particular votes. And we'll look at that in a minute. But understanding that and looking at this across the world has led me to think that this term that I'm using, AI shock, is quite deliberate, because it tells us that in 2024, I really think that the world of L&D was in a state of shock. It was like a deer in the headlights, not knowing where to go and voting for AI, and then everything else, all the other votes were scattered around. And the only things that went up actually last year were a couple of things associated with AI. Now I think it's like people are taking a step back, and I'll show more evidence for this later on. I think people are taking a step back and saying, you know what? Yeah, AI is here. We get it. There's other things that are important. One of them is value. And I'm going to go back to voting for that. And we'll see in a minute that countries have also said, and there's something that's important to me in my culture that I'm voting for. And I'll talk about that in a minute as well. Anushka adds her point: high pressure on the staff due to lack of employees, so management will ask more and more, why should I ask them to spend time on training? I hadn't thought about that one, but it's a really good point. The budgetary pressures are not just on L&D, but outside in the rest of the organization. Everybody's tight on time. Good point. Thank you for that. And I think in some circumstances, that's also the case. And so L&D feels under pressure, definitely, to show value. Thank you for that point. I love these points. I was going to say, at some point, we should get together face to face and discuss this. Obvious place to do that would be in Berlin at OEB. Now, to get into OEB, and our co-presenters or the production staff will put a link into the chat shortly, making the point that you can apply to speak at OEB Berlin, which takes place in the first week of December this year. It's one of my favorite events. It's a great place to meet people from really all around the world in learning and development, in the higher ed space. And you can submit a paper, your chance to speak. The call is out at the moment. So by all means, please do see about submitting a paper to speak at OEB. And it would be great to get together there and continue the conversation face to face. All right, so we talked a lot about AI, even though I said we weren't going to. Here's something I'd like to look at in terms of the world view of what's going on. By the way, that globe is the globe over my shoulder here. It's the world as it existed in the year of my birth. And so if you look at that map very closely, you'll see a whole lot of countries, particularly in Africa, that just don't exist anymore. First thing is that the story about the survey this year is not just about AI. I mean, it's about value, as we've seen. It's also about what else people think is important. And so if we look across the globe, we can see that there are always some things that some countries vote for. So the United Kingdom always supports showing value very strongly. And we'll have a look at exactly how strongly in a while. The Netherlands always supports performance support. That's because of the work probably of Alfred Remitz in the Netherlands, who's been talking about that for really probably a quarter of a century, 25 years. Very strong support for virtual and augmented reality in Poland because they have a very strong indigenous industry there working on that. LXPs in Turkey. In Italy, microlearning, which has always been a bit of a surprise to me, but I discussed that recently with some Italians and they said, yeah, we use mobiles all the time. It's really efficient. And so the strong use of mobile platforms in Italy makes microlearning a much stronger contender for people's enthusiasm, and so on. The USA always votes highly for personalization. In the past, I would have said, and Brazil always votes strongly for social and collaborative learning. But this year, actually, for the first time, personalization overtook collaboration in Brazil. And that was an interesting change that I wasn't expecting because Brazil has been such a strong supporter of collaboration in the past. So we'll see if that continues. And Monica says quite right, what about Germany? Donald, there's a big gap in the middle. What about Germany? Germany was, I think, the biggest vote for AI this year. And because the title of this graphic is Beyond AI, I didn't put it in. I think from memory it was 26.4% of the vote in Germany going to that. So it was a very large vote in Germany for it. The second thing that was voted very highly in Germany is learning analytics. No, sorry, that's not the case. Personalization, strangely, in Germany, which I didn't expect either. So the reason why it's missing, Monica, is not because I've got anything anti-German. It's simply that I was trying to look at something beyond AI. So many votes went to AI in Germany that the other votes were all a bit suppressed. There are other countries on here I've not mentioned as well. Sweden, for example, has always voted very strongly for collaborative learning. And that's something that's part of the Swedish character and culture. And I want to come back to that in a second, because this business of the AI recovery is something that doesn't just extend to the global results. As I was saying earlier, it happens on a local level as well. We have these three phases of predictability, shock, and then recovery. The Netherlands has always been very strong for performance support. That came down and then it bounced back this year. Ireland has always been a strong supporter of coaching and mentoring. Typically, these countries are the country that votes the most for this in the world. It came down and then it bounced back. UK is the country that votes the most for showing value. Here, it was predictable, but it was actually predictable going up. But last year there was a shock and then it bounced back. And so what we've got here is a V shape of shock and recovery. Now, I've chosen these three countries as examples, but the same is true for Poland with microlearning, strangely enough, with Spain, we believe, with skills-based talent management, but the information's a bit light because it's only been on for 4 years. And with Italy, we have 3 years of data, which suggests that there's a bounce back there as well for personalization. There's a sense that in these countries, there's a strong cultural attachment to something. So for some reason, I think we can say why with the Netherlands it's performance support. We don't know why for the other countries it is what it is. But we know that in Sweden, though, there was a strong cultural association with culture and social learning. That didn't bounce back for Sweden. So this is not uniform, the AI recovery, but it certainly is a strong factor. Now, I'm going to be very interested. If we go back to my earlier hypothesis that AI votes are going to fall away next year, I want to see what happens with this recovery next year. Does it continue? Does it flatten off? Does something else pick up the votes that would have gone to AI? So lots of speculation there. Let's have a quick look at one other thing that came out this year, which I was fascinated by because I noticed it last year and I didn't say anything about it. But this year I noticed it again and I felt, well, if it's there for 2 years, it's not a once off. I should talk about it. Language seems to matter. I have a hypothesis for why this is the case. I want to share it with you. If we look at the table for English-speaking countries and for non-English-speaking countries, we can see that the English-speaking countries rate showing value in consulting with the business and also performance support slightly higher, much higher than the non-English-speaking countries. There's a big difference in the votes there. The numbers in brackets here are the position on the global table. So you can see here that it looks as if you speak English, you vote in a particular way, but that's not true for the first 4 options, which are the same on both sides. So what's happening? Firstly, let me just explore one thing, because you might be saying to yourself, hang on, Don, you said how the UK really voted for showing value. Is that just skewing all the votes? Maybe, because look, with the English-speaking countries, there are effectively 4 countries here. UK, USA, Australia, and Ireland. Those are the 4 countries which produce a lot of votes there. We also have Canada and New Zealand, but those 4 are the big 4. On the other side here, we've got something like 70 countries, and we've got something like 40 languages. I haven't included in either table countries like South Africa, where there are something like 11 official languages, and it's difficult to know what any inhabitant would consider to be their first language. So I haven't included them. So I've tried to delineate between countries which are clearly one way or the other. You might say, well, Donald, look, UK is one of 4 countries here. Is that skewing the results? Let's have a look. So here, these are the votes for showing value. These are the 16 countries, which are the key countries that produce the majority of votes for the survey. And if we have a look at them, we can see that the UK does indeed. It's out there. It's way out there in terms of the voting. Where are the non-English speaking countries? Well, the non-English speaking countries are largely to the left here. So it's not a perfect correlation by any means, but there's a strong correlation that the countries on the right-hand side are voting more for showing value than the countries on the left. And actually, you'll notice that the countries which are not part of continental Europe here are voting for it even less. So you may ask yourself, what's going on? Here's my hypothesis. My hypothesis is, if you're on the internet, you're largely communicating in English. And thank you to everybody whose first language isn't English, who's sharing a conversation today with us. But if you're in the UK or the USA or Ireland, you have a conversation online, you go off have a conversation with somebody else, and it's in the same language. if you are in, let's say, Spain, you have a conversation online, you do it in English, you go to somewhere else, you talk with your colleagues locally, you're talking Spanish. And you may, of course, be talking more than one language. If you're in Switzerland, you could have a combination of different languages you're using. My idea is that if you're talking online and sharing ideas with your colleagues in the same language, you're more likely to be in an echo chamber where the same thoughts are repeated than if you're one of those 70 countries and you're speaking one of those 40 languages where you say one thing in English, but you're sharing thoughts locally which won't necessarily be the same thoughts expressed in the same way. I'm not quite sure if that holds up. It may be that there's a different explanation for this. I'm going to do a lot of research about this in the next 6 months. And by the time I come back next year, I hope to have a stronger hypothesis about it. But it's just something I wanted to bring up because I think that there are probably issues with running the survey in English, which I do. Well, I run it in English, French, Mandarin, Thai, and Indonesian, but it's largely in English. And that may skew the results as well. Something to bear in mind. All right, let's look at the challenges and then let's go to some Q&A. You remember that there was this question, the other question, the big question on the survey, what's your biggest L&D challenge in 2025? And if you remember, we had 29,000 words from 85% of the population responding, more words than we've ever had before. Even though we had fewer people responding this year, they wrote more. Nobody knows what 29,000 words is, so it's about the length of Animal Farm or Alice in Wonderland, depending on how optimistic or pessimistic you're feeling about the world. So that's the question. What happens is I get those words in and I put them into buckets. I put them into 9 categories, and you can see the categories here, and they're actually ranked here in terms of the importance. So that's the top category this year, strategy and talent, and this one down at the bottom, external factors like war, economic situation, is the least important factor. And the top 3 roughly make up 50%, then 35%, then 15% of the categorization. So I get the words in, I read everything, I categorize them automatically and then manually, and that's what comes out. And you can see, if you look at just the proportion of people responding over the past 4 years, we started the question in 2022. You can see that for the first two years, strangely, 40% of people answered. And then 2024, bang, 95% of people answered. And it dropped down, as I said, to 85% this year, but it's still a big number. So people got worried in 2024, and you don't have to be a genius to work out what they were worried about. They were worried about one thing. So remember, the challenges questions are free text box. And last year in 2024, 60 people used that free text box to press 3 keys: A, I, return. And in case you're wondering, that's what 60 AIs look like. That was all they wrote. That's my challenge for the year. This year, only 3 people did that. That suggests to me, we had lots of people writing about AI, but they were saying more. I need the skills for AI. I need technical support. I need this, I need that. AI can help me with this. I'm worried about AI's impact on that. They weren't just saying AI is my challenge. And this goes along with that feeling I've got, I was trying to express earlier, that we have an AI shock and an AI recovery. Those 60 AIs were shock. This is recovery. All right, I'm not going to just put 2 letters in. I'm going to talk about what it means to me. Let's have a look at how those categories have panned out over the past 4 years. The only category which has increased the proportion of votes, a proportion of comments it's collected over the time, is this one here, the resources, budget, and workload one. And this, it's not the biggest one by any means, but it's increasing each year. And the phrase that comes out from many different countries is trying to do more with less. That's the phrase that sums that one up. Technology leapt from nowhere in 2023 to number 1 in 2024, driven by AI. And this year, interestingly, it fell back very slightly and strategy took over as the most important bucket of people's concerns. And again, I think this is us saying, okay, AI is important, yes, but there are other things which are more important we're going to focus on. Again, this is recovery, I think, from the shock. We've talked quite a lot about content in this webinar. And interestingly, the content side of this has been unaffected by AI over this period. Nobody is saying either it's easier or it's more complicated as a result of AI. What else has happened? Strangely, delivery problems have fallen away and issues with people seem to have fallen away quite dramatically. And I can't really find an explanation for this unless, sadly, the problem is that people are saying, oh, actually, what's happened here is that I'm focused on technology. I don't care about people. That would concern me if that's what's happening here. Gail, thanks for your comment here. I'm going to come back to that in a minute because I really like the nuance that you're expressing there. And I think that's something which we should dwell on for a bit. Just want to go to that famous one slide wrap up for conclusions. And this is my moment to share with you the idea that, hey, it's a good idea to start getting your questions ready. Let's have a discussion around it. And I will try to deal with the questions as they come in. 5 things to think about this year. The interest in AI continues. You do not need me to speak to you for an hour to get that. But I think this is the nuance that we get out of the results this year, which is that it's not the same thing. It's not the same interest that we had last year. There's a shift, a maturity, a more nuanced view. Interest and value is back. The world remains full of different views. Remember the map, every country having something they were focused on and interested in for some reason. I think that's really important. I always want to say to people, look, that global table of results is global. It's the whole world. Your own country, your culture, your company will be specific, will have its own ideas, and you'll have what's right for you. So do not please look at that and say, we should be doing this because everyone else is talking about it. Rather, use that table as a way of discussing, that's interesting. Why are people thinking about that? What should we be thinking about for our particular circumstance and context? Challenges, as I say, of strategy and also of delivery persist. And I also believe in this one here, I've presented no evidence for it, that there's great opportunity here with AI, but there are challenges. And I think we've seen that some of the drivers behind that reversal in the fortunes of value. People are excited about value because they're concerned about the impact of AI. The report is a 32-page report, which will, it's now available, and OEB will get that out to you. And that's me on LinkedIn. I'll drop my LinkedIn URL into the chat as well. Would love, as always, to stay in touch. I'm going to jump straight into the Q&A now. There is a lag, by the way. We're doing this in Zoom, and then it goes out to StreamYard, which is where you're watching this. And that delay will mean that I may appear to be ignoring your question for 30 seconds, and then I'll respond to it. So please don't think I'm ignoring you. I want to just deal with Gail's point about there's a value system around money, and talking about English-speaking countries are very comfortable talking about money. It's not always the case with other countries, although things have certainly changed. And the language about value is also different. That's a really good point, Gail. Thank you for raising it. So there are 2 things there which I will explore in the coming year. One is, what does value mean for different places? And secondly, how comfortable are people talking about value and money in their own particular culture? Could be very different in different places, and that will affect how they vote. And in particular, Gail, what I will do is I will have a look at the French results for this year and previous years, where I've done it purely in French, and I've done it in French, and I've done it in English, and compare, is there a difference in those results? Because I suspect there will be. So thank you for raising that point. Stella asks, are people beginning to realize content is less important anyway, especially if they're focused on value? I'm thinking, no, I don't think so. I think L&D people largely are focused on the idea of content as being our job. And I don't believe it is, but I still think people see that as being the rationale for L&D, is the production and distribution of content. And I think that will continue. I think it's going to take more than 1 year of things being, or 2 years of things being a bit different for that to alter. But if you disagree, Stella, please let me know, because it's a good question. And it may be that is a shift which is going to happen. Question from Rasmus: do you think the current political situation in the US is causing worries for companies, which may result in less investment in L&D in the coming years? It's a great question, Rasmus. One of the reasons that I heard from the US for that downtick in the US vote, that shift in the light blue line going downwards, one reason for that was that people were saying, well, I'm voting against the tech bros and their political influence. I don't want to be associated with AI. So there is certainly, I'm not saying that was the driver for the downward drop, but I'm saying that people are conscious of it as being a possibility. That could certainly extend to the political situation. There is, I think the latest things I read from, I think it was Bloomberg, was a prediction of a drop in GDP growth next year in the States. Not a drop in growth, a drop in GDP next year in the States as a result of some of the policies that are being implemented. That would certainly lead to a drop in investment in learning. Absolutely. And as always with these things, sentiment is so important. We don't know what's going to happen next year. But if people are talking about it and they're concerned about it, then that's usually enough to drive down investment. And so there's I think you've raised a really good point, and I think it's absolutely likely that there will be less investment in L&D in the coming, not years necessarily, but coming months, maybe year in the US. And then reality will kick in. Anushka says the rise of AI demands for changes in strategy, skills, and teams. So I'm not surprised that strategy, skills, and talent is back to number one. Well, no, I'm not surprised either, Anushka, but for a different reason. Here's the weird thing. We've seen, and I have talked about this endlessly for the past 12 years, we've seen that across the world, the responses to the question, what's hot and what's not hot, really varies enormously according to which country you're in. But strangely, the question of what's your challenge varies very little from country to country. And I regularly look at the results with one country or one geography versus another, and the challenges we have are almost all the same. So I'm not surprised about strategy being back at the top, but just because it's long been the dominant thing that people have been concerned about. However, you're right, AI will demand changes there, and if people have got any sense, they will be concerned about it. Let's just jump to that question that Joseph pointed out earlier. The fact that social learning is going down is not a good sign. It conflicts with creating real learning environments. Is this because of vendor influence? Don't forget that the descent of something over the survey doesn't necessarily mean that people think it's not important. It might simply be that people accept that this is now something real and it's part of our lives. That's what happened with mobile delivery. So if something's going down, like we saw with the descent of collaborative and social learning, that peaked right at the beginning of me doing the survey after a series of interventions by people which had been kicked off by Jay Cross's book around informal learning, published around 2010. That book changed the way people thought about informal learning and social learning, led people to take it much more seriously, led to a surge of interest in that, which I think changed the way people thought about how people learn and the importance of collaborative learning. I feel that it's much more the case, Jeff, that this is a case of the option being part of our lives now, rather than it not being important. Okay, I'm just going to wrap up now with Stella's point, and I'm going to just remind everybody, before I do that, that OEB cast is just one moment in your calendar, but OEB, the event in Berlin, is several days of great interaction and chat with people in Berlin in the first week of December. I would definitely suggest that you put a paper in to apply for a speaking slot. The link will be coming very shortly there. Okay, I think you're right, Don, about the shift away from content. It will be slow, but we need to shift that focus onto performance and transfer if we want to add business value. I completely agree. I see more people talking about transfer, but it's a new way of working, so it's challenging. I look at the responses from Gail. I like your optimism, says Stella, says Gail. And Mark says there are challenges with L&D in that it's super reactive to the latest shiny thing. And I think both of those reactions are right. I want to be as optimistic as Stella here. I want to look forward to a future where we are influential because we are altering performance thanks to helping people do their jobs better. My concern is that we seize on the latest shiny thing, as Mark says, because it is something that everyone else is talking about. And behind what I do with the Global Sentiment Survey, that's really the driver to try to work out what are the things that are real and what is just shiny fluff that comes and goes. AI is not shiny fluff that comes and goes. There's a tremendous amount of hype around it, but there is a reality to the use of data in learning and development, which will alter how we do our work. And if we don't get with the program, we run the risk of being bypassed completely. So my final message to this is one of optimism tempered with reality, which is we need to work with the business, as Stella says, and we need to understand the data in order to do our jobs properly. So much more we could talk about. Let's get together for a beer or a coffee in the Cafe Marlena in the Intercontinental Hotel in Berlin during OEB in the first week of December. Please submit your ideas and submissions as per the link in the chat. That's it from me now. Thanks so much for coming along. I hope to see you again very soon. Bye for now.